She knew what was coming. The stones were already in their hands. The sun had barely risen over Jerusalem, but the crowd was already gathering. Word travelled fast in the temple courts. A woman caught in the act. The law was clear. The punishment was certain. And everyone wanted to watch. They dragged her through the narrow streets, her clothes torn, her face bruised, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't fight. What was the point? The men who held her arms were religious leaders, respected teachers of the law. Their grip was iron. Their voices were loud. They wanted everyone to see. This wasn't about justice. This was about making an example. The crowd parted as they pulled her forward. Women turned away. Men whispered to each other. Children stared. She could feel every eye on her, burning into her skin like brands. Shame wrapped around her throat like a noose. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could do was stumble forward as they pushed her toward the center of the courtyard. Then she saw him. Jesus was teaching. People sat at his feet, listening. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that made you want to lean in closer. But now, the lesson was interrupted. The religious leaders shoved her forward, and she collapsed onto the stone pavement in front of him. Dust rose around her. She didn't look up. She couldn't. One of the Pharisees stepped forward. His voice was sharp, cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. The law of Moses commands us to stone such women. What do you say?" The crowd went silent. Everyone knew what this was. A trap. If Jesus said stone her, he'd contradict everything he'd been teaching about mercy and love. If he said let her go, he'd be breaking the law of Moses. Either way, they had him, or so they thought. She stayed on the ground, trembling. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She could hear the stones scraping against palms. The men were ready. They were eager. Some of them had probably been planning this moment for hours, waiting for the right opportunity to test this teacher everyone was talking about. But Jesus didn't answer right away. Instead, he bent down, and he started writing in the dust with his finger. The Pharisees looked at each other, confused. What was he doing? They asked the question again, louder this time, demanding an answer. The woman squeezed her eyes shut. Any second now, the first stone would fly. Any second, the pain would start. And then it would all be over. But Jesus kept writing. Some scholars think he was writing the sins of the accusers. Others believe he was writing passages from the law. The text doesn't tell us. But whatever he wrote, it changed the atmosphere completely. The confidence in the Pharisees' voices began to waver. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Jesus stood up. His eyes moved across the crowd. Not with anger, not with judgment, just steady, unwavering truth. And then he spoke. "Let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." 7 words. That's all it took. The silence that followed was deafening. The woman didn't move. She didn't dare. But she could hear it. The sound of stones dropping onto the ground. One by one. Thud, thud, thud. Like a heartbeat slowing down. Like tension releasing. The oldest men left first. They had lived long enough to know their own failures. The younger ones followed. Pride gave way to honesty. Accusation gave way to self-awareness. One by one, they walked away until the courtyard was nearly empty. She was still on the ground, waiting for the blow that never came. Her hands were scraped. Her knees were bleeding. But the stones had stopped falling. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her head. The crowd was gone. The accusers had vanished. Only Jesus remained, standing a few feet away, watching her with eyes that held no condemnation, just compassion. He bent down again, this time not to write, but to meet her at her level. "Where are your accusers?" he asked gently. "Has no one condemned you?" Her voice came out as a whisper, "No one, Lord." And then Jesus said the words that would echo through history, words that would change everything for her and for countless others who would hear this story in the centuries to come. "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." She stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. No condemnation, no punishment, no stones, just mercy, just grace, just a second chance she didn't deserve and couldn't earn. The religious leaders had dragged her here to be destroyed, but Jesus had given her back her life. This moment reveals something profound about the nature of forgiveness. The law demanded punishment. Justice called for consequences. The crowd expected blood. But Jesus saw something else. He saw a woman who needed mercy more than she needed judgment. A woman who already knew her guilt and didn't need 1,000 voices reminding her. The Pharisees wanted to use her as a weapon against Jesus. They didn't care about her soul. They didn't care about her restoration. She was a tool, a test case, an object lesson in their theological game. But Jesus refused to play by their rules. He didn't excuse her sin. He acknowledged it directly. Go and sin no more. But he separated her identity from her actions. She had sinned, but she wasn't beyond redemption. She had failed, but she wasn't worthless. She had broken the law, but she wasn't irredeemable. The stones that were meant to kill her became symbols of something else entirely. Every stone that dropped to the ground represented a person confronting their own brokenness. Every accuser who walked away was forced to admit they had no right to judge. Because that's the truth Jesus exposed that morning. None of us have clean hands. None of us stand above reproach. We all have moments we'd rather forget, choices we regret, failures we've hidden, and yet we're so quick to pick up stones when someone else stumbles. The woman stood up slowly, her legs shaking. The dust on her clothes bore witness to how close she'd come to death. But she was alive, more than alive. She was free. Think about what happened in those moments after the crowd dispersed. She had to walk back through those same streets where everyone had just witnessed her shame, past the neighbours who had gathered to watch her execution, past the merchants who had closed their shops to see the spectacle, past the children who had been hurried inside by their mothers. But something had shifted. The accusers had left first. They couldn't meet her eyes anymore. They had their own sins to wrestle with now. Jesus had accomplished something remarkable without saying a word about most of it. He transformed a public execution into a mass confession. He turned a moment of judgment into an opportunity for self-examination. Every person who dropped their stone and walked away carried with them a new awareness of their own need for mercy. This is why the story matters so deeply. Not just because one woman was saved, though that alone would be enough, but because Jesus revealed a pattern that would define his entire ministry. He consistently chose mercy over ritual, people over rules, restoration over punishment. The Pharisees thought they had him trapped. If he said to stone her, he'd contradict his message of grace and love. If he said to let her go, he'd be rejecting the law of Moses. They'd constructed what seemed like a perfect theological checkmate. But Jesus didn't choose either option. He redefined the entire scenario. He didn't reject the law. The law was right about sin and its consequences. He didn't ignore her guilt. He acknowledged it directly. But he shifted the focus from her failure to everyone's failure, from her sin to their hypocrisy, from judgment to self-awareness. Consider the brilliance of his response. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. He didn't say the law was wrong. He didn't say she shouldn't be punished. He simply established the prerequisite for being her judge: sinlessness. And that requirement disqualified everyone present, except him. Here's where the story gets even more powerful. Jesus was the only person in that courtyard who actually could have thrown a stone. He was the only one without sin, the only one qualified to condemn, the only one whose judgment would be righteous, and he chose not to. That choice reveals the heart of God in a way that centuries of theological debate never could. God doesn't delight in punishment. He doesn't eagerly wait for us to fail so he can strike us down. He's not scanning the earth looking for reasons to condemn. He's looking for reasons to redeem. The woman's sin was real. The law's demands were legitimate. Justice had a claim. But mercy triumphed over judgment. Not because the sin didn't matter, but because the sinner mattered more. This is the scandal of grace. It offends our sense of fairness. We want people to get what they deserve. We want scales balanced and accounts settled. We want wrongdoing punished and righteousness rewarded. But Jesus kept disrupting that system. The workers hired at the last hour got paid the same as those who worked all day. The prodigal son got a party while the faithful son got a lecture about resentment. The thief on the cross got paradise after a lifetime of crime. Grace doesn't make sense to us because we're hardwired for transaction. You do this, you get that. You fail here, you pay there. It's logical, it's predictable, it's controllable. Grace shatters all of that. The woman walked away from that courtyard, carrying something she didn't have when she was dragged there. Not just her life, though that was precious, but hope, the possibility of change, the knowledge that her past didn't have to define her future. Go and sin no more. That wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Jesus was telling her that her story didn't have to end in shame. She could write new chapters. She could become someone different. But here's what we often miss. That invitation wasn't contingent on her success. Jesus didn't say, "I won't condemn you if you never sin again." He said, "I don't condemn you. Now go and sin no more." The mercy came first. The transformation was meant to flow from it. This is backwards from how we usually think about change. We assume we need to clean ourselves up before we can approach God. We need to get our act together, break our bad habits, become worthy. But Jesus kept demonstrating the opposite. He offered acceptance first, then watched transformation follow. He ate with tax collectors before they repented. He touched lepers before they were healed. He called disciples who were still deeply flawed. The woman in this story received mercy she hadn't earned and couldn't repay. That's the definition of grace. Unmerited favor, undeserved kindness, love given freely to people who have no claim to it. And that grace is meant to change us. Not through guilt or shame or fear, but through gratitude, through the overwhelming realization that we've been given something we could never deserve. The Pharisees left that courtyard bitter. They'd been exposed. Their trap had failed. Their self-righteousness had been challenged. They learned nothing. The woman left, transformed. She'd been seen in her worst moment and offered her best chance. She'd expected death and received life. She'd braced for condemnation and heard mercy instead. Which person would you rather be? We all have moments when we're the woman, caught, exposed, guilty, waiting for the stones to fly, knowing we deserve what's coming. And we all have moments when we're the Pharisees, holding stones, ready to judge, convinced of our righteousness, eager to see justice done to someone else. The question is which voice we listen to, the voice that says you're defined by your worst moment, or the voice that says neither do I condemn you. Jesus didn't come to earth to throw stones, he came to take them. Every rock meant for us, he absorbed himself. Every accusation, every condemnation, every just punishment. The cross was where all those stones landed, where judgment fell, where mercy paid the price that justice demanded. That woman walked away free because Jesus would later hang condemned. She got grace because he took guilt. She received life because he accepted death. That's the exchange at the heart of everything. our sin for his righteousness, our shame for his glory, our death for his life. The stones dropped that day in Jerusalem. They've been dropping ever since. Every time someone encounters the mercy of Jesus and realizes they don't have to carry their guilt anymore, the question isn't whether you've sinned. You have. We all have. The question is what you'll do with the mercy being offered. The stones are still in our hands. The question is whether we'll drop them or throw them, whether we'll demand justice for others while begging for mercy for ourselves, or whether we'll extend the same grace we desperately need. Jesus forgave her when no one else would, and he's still doing it today, for her, for them, for you.